Chapter 13. The heated debate that was taking place in the kitchen was nearly as hot as the bubbling saucepans of vegetables and potatoes that were on the monstrous stoves. Kieran Valentine, Maria Lemasters, Tristan Gowron, Abigail Lemasters, Julia Boston and David Bruce were all arguing as service robots glided past them as they bickered. "How far can we trust you to keep our secrets?" interrogated Abigail Lemasters to Tristan Gowron. "How can we?" seconded Julia Boston. "Believe me, I know that I'm suspicious, but I'm here and I want to help you all," reassured Tristan, trying to defuse the argument his presence had caused. "I personally am not sure. While his spirit is appreciated, we cannot allow Tristan to alert the Order of the Realms as to where we are. That would certainly result in invasion, as they would want a staging ground for a large attack on the now Central Federation, which we are close to. How would that affect the people of Devonshire, who have been through enough under Traston Fell?" calmly inquired David Bruce, stroking his goatee. The group nodded and agreed with his considered words. "As I'm Sovereign Baron of the realm of Devonshire, that is important. I said to Maria that he couldn't be part of the team when we were on Stymar 5, echoed Valentine. While he was still not accustomed to being Sovereign Baron, having taken the title from the previous holder, the villainous crime lord Traston Fell, he felt a great sense of responsibility for the people of Devonshire, who had been oppressed for so many years. "You always bring up the fact that you're the Sovereign Baron. A few years ago you were employed by the previous Baron as a cold-blooded mercenary who didn't care about anyone other than themselves," exclaimed Maria, defending Tristan, whom she had started to grow close to on the trip back. "You are going to take that back right now," said Valentine aggressively. He hated being reminded about his murderous past. "I saved all of your friends when they were going to be put in jail for treason. I came to your aid. This is my castle. I ask you to accept my rules." The argument simmered down. The saucepans had come up to the boil. They glanced at each other, realising they had all said things they regretted. "I'm sorry, Valentine," said Maria, breaking the group's silence. "I should not have said that." Valentine took a deep breath, looking Tristan squarely in the eyes. "All right. So long as Tristan doesn't sell us out to his father or to anyone else, he can stay and be a part of the team," sighed Valentine, accepting that an extra trained fighter would benefit them greatly, especially one of his importance. The group, realising they were wrong, looked towards Tristan for confirmation he would not betray them. "I won't. I swear on my honour," affirmed Tristan, feeling relieved that the group had begun to accept him and not just Maria. The group in the kitchen disbanded as Valentine approached Tristan. He leaned closely to Tristan's ear and whispered, "If you betray us, I will kill you myself. These people are all I have now." "Understandable. I want it that way. I want to earn your trust, because I trust you all to do the right thing and save the realms," softly spoke Tristan, walking away, being approached by the frail Sturnon. She was now a shadow of her former self, her uniform replaced with the simple clothes that hung loose on her lifeless frame. She shuffled towards him, hunched and timid. "You must be the one everyone is talking about here," stuttered Sturnon, her constitution weak and her persona withdrawn. "Yes, I am. I assume you're High General Commissioner Sturnon. A pleasure to meet you, ma'am." "I assure you that I'm on your side," smiled Tristan, worried that Sturnon might collapse at any second. No. You are the pleasure to meet, not I. The failed leader. The one who let her best friend die," said Sturnon weakly. "Do you see him there?" she asked, pointing to the skeletal figure in the colonel's uniform that appeared before her, his black beard rotting but still familiar. "I don't see anyone there, ma'am. Are you feeling all right?" said Tristan, now deeply worried about his newfound ally. "Oh, fine," muttered Sturnon, seeing the bony spectre reach out and say in a ghostly voice, "You killed me. You failed. I would be alive if not for you." Sturnon let out a shriek of terror once more, collapsing to the floor, scurrying away from the spectre. Tristan was scared now. The person he had heard the legends of was a quivering mass, possibly hallucinating before his very eyes. "Get away from me, Robert! Get away! Forgive me! Leave me!" exclaimed Sturnon with all her might, that drained from her in an instant. She collapsed to the ground, unconscious to the world. Tristan called for help as Abigail and Crusher helped her to her bed. Maria comforted the distressed Tristan, who, like all within the castle, were concerned that Sturnon may not make it much further in life. Chapter 14. Knock, knock, knock. "Enter," called Sturnon. Colonel Abigail Lemaster slowly opened the door, holding a small electronic device with an antenna on it, beeping constantly and quietly. "Colonel Lemasters, is everything all right?" asked the High General Commissioner. Abigail signalled to her that she was tracking something on the small device, holding up a notepad that read, "Your office has been bugged." "Yes, everything is fine. I wanted to talk to you about the excess reports," said Abigail, her voice slower as she softly followed the tracker's signal to the bug in the office. "Good to hear, Colonel," replied Sturnon. Abigail was moving to a large leafed potted plant in the corner behind the door opposite the desk. She then reached into the pot of the plant and felt around for a few seconds, taking out a miniature listening device, showing Katelyn before crushing it in her hand. It gave a limp sizzle as Abigail threw it in the bin. They both breathed a great sigh of relief. Abigail ensured the door was closed and sat down to talk to Sturnon. "Thank you, Abigail. How did you know?" asked Sturnon, relieved. "Its signal temporarily got crossed with my personal communicator yesterday. I started hearing your conversation with Colonel Ember about effective policy planning and the autopsy results of Colonel Helga Dramden," explained Abigail Masters, knowing that what she accidentally heard would have most certainly been heard by whoever had bugged Katelyn Sturnon, along with many other confidential meetings. "I see. Please call a meeting of the Council of the Colonels. I think it has come time to find out who's been bugging me," ordered Katelyn Sturnon, ready to see who knew about the bug. "Do you think that Heckford is about to play his hand, ma'am?" asked Abigail cautiously, thinking that everything was about to kick off. Sturnon turned around in her chair, staring out the full-height windows that glared down to the street below. At the top of the constabulary tower, it was lonely. "Yes, Colonel, I think he is, or one of his allies," said Sturnon carefully. "What happens in the meeting will determine the course of events in the city for years to come." The Council of the Colonels sat in their seats. It was highly irregular for the High General Commissioner to call a meeting this quickly. There was an uncomfortable aura that engulfed the room, the Colonels shuffling their capes in their seats. The High General Commissioner marched into the boardroom, the glass panelling rattling as she closed the door, followed by Colonel Abigail Masters, taking the seat on the left. Katelyn remained standing to address the Council. "Thank you all for coming. I would like to inform you all the progress of the investigation into the death of Colonel Helga Dramden that is being conducted by Department 4, clearly spoke the High General Commissioner. The Colonels looked at each other, all looking unsettled by this. "I would like to vote on the discontinuation of this investigation," abruptly stated Sturnon. There was a panicked glance at each other. Colonels Keller, Jameson, Ravensthorpe and Arensk looked towards Heckford. Colonel Heckford gave a small, unnoticeable gesture, brushing his hair behind his right ear. That was the confirmation that Sturnon needed. The vote took place. Robert Ember, David Bruce and Abigail Masters all voted no, with Sturnon abstaining. The rest voted yes. Once the vote ended, the meeting was adjourned. Katelyn Sturnon, Robert Ember, Abigail Masters and David Bruce met in her office. "So, ma'am, I assume that I will not order Major Smith to discontinue the investigation?" checked Ember. He knew that Sturnon was up to something in the meeting. "Of course, the investigation is continuing. I think that if we are all agreed, we now know for certain who is in play and who the leader is. It is my conviction that we put everyone on high alert, and I talked to Colonel Heckford to try and defuse the situation," said Sturnon, every word having weight to it. "I can agree to that," confirmed Colonel Bruce. "As can I," agreed Colonel Masters. "What you think is best, ma'am," assured Colonel Ember, his long-time commander and friend smiling graciously at him. While he had not trusted Sturnon when she first came to Department 4, he had come to trust her both implicitly and explicitly. High General Commissioner Sturnon stood to prepare herself for perhaps the most important conversation of her life, potentially the most important in the history of the constabulary and Nala Central itself. Chapter 15. Drowning in a pool of darkness, Sturnon lay in her bed, as the rest gathered around her. Their prayers for her health swirled around the bedroom like a whirlpool. She vaguely knew of their presence, but did not have the strength to respond. In her dream she was in a black void. The darkness sucked her in and began to fill her lungs with water, or the blood of her dead allies. So much suffering that had happened. First the death of Helga Dramden, then the deaths of Kyle Bruce, Blast, and even her dear friend Robert Ember. They had all trusted her, and yet she had failed them so utterly. As the hours and days rolled on, she was hooked up to an IV drip, still out cold. In her mind she saw her room, sparse and bare, with a chair in the corner. She sat up in her bed, leaning slightly closer to the chair, where the skeletal figure returned, forcing her back under the duvet covers. "You cower before me, the great High General Commissioner? So pathetic," sneered the spectre. His form came into grave focus as he rose from the leather armchair, putting a deathly claw on his prey's bedpost. Not long until you join me. You cannot run from it, you cannot hide from it. My vengeance will be sweet. After all, you denied me countless promotions, made me play second fiddle to you everywhere you went. I wish I had never met you. The skeleton teased as Sturnon retreated further within herself, trying to close her eyes, but as it was a nightmare, she could not. If it were not for you, I would be alive. Your dear friend would still be here to tell you that everything is fine, even though it is an abominable catastrophe, continued the figure. His words echoed around the chamber, getting closer and closer to Sturnon's head, as if to rip out the soul and drag it to the realm of the dead, forever imprisoning it. Sturnon knew her time was up, but then she heard a silent whisper of words from beyond. I know you cannot hear me, ma'am. I'm not even sure if it will do any good, but here we are, said Captain Augustus Montgomery, slightly tearing up, his rich voice providing a lifeline to Sturnon. When you first joined Department 4, we were all sceptical about you. You were a strict outsider who had taken a job that had previously been promised to Robert Ember, one of our own. As time went on, however, you earned our trust and our friendship. I, like so many, owe you so much. I know you blame yourself for this mess, but you are not the one who caused this. Out of anyone, you were the closest to ending it before it even began. We all knew what we were risking, and we all accepted it. Those who sadly died during the course of events in the escape would not want you to become a shell of the great person and friend you once were. They would want you to stand up to this newly formed Nala Central Federation and lead us back to the way things were. You are the leader we need. Get better soon, please, in the name of everything that is good in the realms. He stroked his brown moustache and left Sturnon's bedside, who remained immobile in her bed. These words filtered into Sturnon's mind as she slowly started to rise, sitting up to confront the skeletal figure. I know who you pretend to be. A great man and friend I had. Robert Ember. He was the best of anyone, and I trusted him, announced Sturnon, getting out of her bed and standing strong for the first time in months, as she stood against the skeletal figure at her bedside. You cannot fight me. You cannot stop me. You shall die like your friend did, knowing your failure has doomed everyone. The skeleton, trying to intimidate Sturnon, said, but she held strong and returned. No. While my failure has set us back, we will rebuild, and I will be the one to lead them to victory, my training and insights aiding them in their fight against the injustice that has befallen Nala Central. No, 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 you will fail, screamed the spectral figure as it disintegrated into ashes which blew out of the open latticed window across the bay and into the open sea. She was free. Sturnon woke up, promptly getting out of bed, drinking the Vita smoothie on her dresser. She got herself sorted. First, personal hygiene and grooming, her smooth brown hair once again short and combed over, her makeup applied with care and precision. Next, she changed, putting on her High General Commissioner's uniform, the badge shining in the dull light from the lamp, then attaching her cape, flowing behind her, before finally attaching her blue epaulets, the final sign of her rank and status. Pulling on her black faux leather boots, Katelyn marched out of the door, down the stone stairs, through the grand hallways until reaching the double doors of the living room. Opening both, the room came to a sudden stop as they saw her standing tall in the doorway. A new aura of confidence had come over her. Smiling, Maria stood up to salute and greet the returning High General Commissioner. Ma'am, good to see you back on your feet. It is good to be back, and please call me Katelyn or Sturnon. I am no longer High General Commissioner, but I will be once again, announced Sturnon, knowing that she would be a key leader in the victory of the Freedom Team over the Nala Central Federation. Once again? Are you sure about that, Sturnon? Said Valentine, with a slightly confused look on his face. The turnaround was remarkable. Yes, Valentine, I intend for us to be victorious and return Nala Central to what it was. You all have my word, confirmed Sturnon. The room knew she was back to her old self, a self-assured commander who could achieve any goal that she set herself to. They were ready to win not just individual battles, they were ready to win the war. Sturnon smiled as the group embraced her and welcomed her back. She knew that while she had lost so much in the last year, she still had good friends who had become her family. Chapter 16. Sturnon was in Colonel Heckford's office. He was out for lunch, and Sturnon seized the opportunity to go through his computer for any additional evidence as she looked through his emails. Checking the encrypted file, she saw there was one email with the subject line, Protectorate Directive. It read as follows. To all commanders within the Protectorate. As you are aware, High General Commissioner Sturnon is closing in on our group. This means that the schedule for triggering of Directive 158609 has moved up. Please ensure that all Protectorate officers are put on standby for this, as I suspect that the directive will be given in the coming week. Many thanks for your cooperation, Colonel Sebastian Heckford. A signed confession if Katelyn had ever seen one herself. She downloaded all his files and emails onto a small pocket data drive that she slipped into her pocket. The lift sounded off at the other end of the hallway. Heckford was back from lunch and about to be confronted. The Colonel casually walked into his office, then stopped dead when he saw the High General Commissioner sitting behind his glass desk, staring at him. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" inquired Heckford, with a half-smile on his face. Sturnon stood up and turned around the computer monitor with the email on it. Heckford's face dropped into a serious expression. He knew his cover had been blown. "Colonel Heckford, what is this?" asked Sturnon. "It is an email," replied Heckford. "Yes, please read what it says, Colonel," ordered the High General Commissioner. Heckford read it, looking at Sturnon with narrowed eyes. "What purpose does this Protectorate have, and what is this directive that the email mentions?" demanded Sturnon. "The Protectorate is 88% of all officers within the constabulary, and the directive is the order that I will give to remove those who are not part of it," said Heckford calmly. "What is your goal? Why would you do this? Damien Paulstrom trusted you," said Sturnon in an authoritative tone. "The Protectorate is the group that will take control of the constabulary and integrate with the villain empire once they arrive at Government House to seize power. As to why we are doing this, is because I realised after the Bagstapian Revolution that the villain empire and now the Central Constabulary are two similar forces with similar goals and objectives, and I knew that if we integrated, we would eliminate the threat to each other and strengthen our realm's might. Most of the constabulary agreed with me when I approached them, and then when Talia Verst approached me with forming a Nala Central Federation that would rule the rest of the realms, and with there being a considerable number of members within the Protectorate already, how could I say no?" revealed Heckford, confident in his rationale. "So you confess you have been behind this all this time?" asked Sturnon. "Yes, I do. Though I wonder, what gave me away?" inquired the Colonel. "The murder of Helga Dramden. The only person that would be threatened by her investigations that were going on would be you. As well as that, the tip-off that she was given was routed back to your office," explained Sturnon. "Ah, I see. That is what gave me away," smiled Heckford. He took out his communication device and said with a slightly maniacal laugh, "Attention all members of the Protectorate. Directive 158609 is now in effect. Arrest all non-Protectorate officers immediately." There was a rush as two armed guards came into the office, flanking Colonel Heckford, aiming their guns, set to kill, at High General Commissioner Sturnon. "And that triggers the takeover of Nala Central," said Heckford smugly, as Villain Empire transports began hurtling past the windows, landing outside the nearby government house, led by Emperor Talia Verst. There was a loud bang and shots were fired from the offices of Colonels Ember, Bruce and the Masters as all three barged their way through the corridor past the onslaught of soldiers stationed on the level. "I have a contingency of my own, Colonel, one that I triggered before arriving, meaning that it's time for me to leave," gently said Katelyn Sturnon, before quickly drawing her gun, stunning the two armed officers before shooting Heckford in the shoulder. She ran out the door, meeting up with the colonels who were making their way through the offices to the High General Commissioner's office, where there was an escape route to the roof, where she had her agent-class jet ready to go. Sebastian Heckford got to his feet as Sturnon reached the lift in her office and ascended to the roof. He picked up his communicator. "Commander Merrick, follow Sturnon's jet and stop her and any of her allies," he spat, still smarting from the blast wound he had sustained. High General Commissioner Katelyn Sturnon, Colonel Robert Ember, Colonel David Bruce and Colonel Abigail the Masters ran along the platforms on the roof of the constabulary tower towards her jet, its wings up, though rear ramp down, ready to go. They boarded and closed the ramp. "Who is going to fly this thing?" asked Sturnon. She wasn't completely sure how to fly the jet, but could probably get it up in the air. "Probably." "I can fly it," responded Colonel Bruce, having been an ace pilot himself before an injury restrained him. "I will need a co-pilot, though." Colonel Le Masters took her seat at the co-pilot's array, activating the wingtip engines, which burst into life. Colonel Ember and High General Commissioner Sturnon went into the back and sat near the cockpit door on the High General Commissioner's in-flight seats. Robert Ember held out his hand as they took off to comfort Sturnon. Everything they knew was now in pieces, and she held his hand and smiled at him. The lift engines then began to raise the jet as the wings folded down as they left the platform, heading to Nala Central Grand Park. There was a problem, however. They heard the screech of troop transport ships launching from the tower's main hangar. They realised that Heckford had sent a pursuit party. The jet soared as the 5 troop transports followed, their repulsor engines wailing as they attempted to keep up with the jet, but they did and started firing small shots at the jet. "Hold on, everyone, I'm going to have to lose them," shouted Bruce, who had returned to his fighter pilot training. He banked right, ducking and weaving his way through the skyscrapers and above buildings. It seemed as if they were lost them. They then landed at Nala Central Grand Park, where a large rusty ship with a hangar room waited for them. They landed within its frame and disembarked. They were greeted by Maria the Masters, who was there with everyone else, except for the new heroes who had apparently been rounded up and arrested. "Thank goodness you made it here," she exclaimed. "Captain the Masters, whose ship is this?" Sturnon asked. "That would be my cruise," came the approaching voice of Kieran Valentine. "While I would like to discuss this further with you, High General Commissioner, and the morality about it, I suggest we defend our flanks, as we can't take off as there are cyclone jets and troop transports incoming." The transports that had been following them landed at the front of the park, with black-clad troops disembarking. They were led by Commander Merrick, who now worked as the enforcer for Colonel Heckford, having previously been the commander of High General Commissioner Bagstaff's guard. The blast fire began with a nightmarish flurry, with those assembled defending themselves. Shots fired across the open port side of the Voyage Maker, scorching everything inside lightly. As the soldiers closed in on Matilda, in her brown overalls, tried to fire up the engine. Then, bang! "Son of a brick! The Peronium injector has just gone offline," cursed Matilda. Ricky, Spanner and Ashley Turner all heard this and went to the engine room to fix it. They weren't going anywhere without that injector online. The armoured soldiers marched on. Merrick reached the boarding ramp, aiming his gun at squadron leader Carl Bruce, who was busy firing at a group of soldiers entrenched. He squeezed the trigger and with one shot killed Carl Bruce. He fell to the floor, his light blue jumpsuit deflating. His blonde hair flopped as his head hit the floor, and he dropped the blaster he had been defending himself with. Colonel David Bruce saw what Merrick done. He let out a roar, drew his pistol and forced the commanders to retreat. Bruce then knelt by his son's lifeless corpse and let out a tear of grief. Getting up, David dragged the body further into the ship, off the boarding ramp, tears streaming down his cheeks. Ammo and Blast were defending the engines from attack, their heavy weapons firing on all cylinders, taking out numerous soldiers that advanced, but they were unrelenting. Ammo took a shot to the ribs, dropping him to the floor of the boarding ramp temporarily. The soldiers then poured onto Blast, her twin cannons firing continually. The soldiers fired, kept firing, until they hit her chest once. This then gave the Horde the chance to unleash a hellfire on her, with her body falling to the ramp floor mutilated by blaster burns. Ammo slowly regained his footing. Picking up his machine gun, he then began a rampage at the soldiers, taking out the wall of armour that surrounded Blast's body. "You Duplo bricks!" yelled Ammo, his voice full of anger as he launched at them, cracking their helmets with his gun's axe, knocking them unconscious. He let off a furious flurry of fire as he picked up Blast, and firemen carried her off the ramp and into the ship. "Try that now! If it don't start now, we're never getting out of here!" bellowed Ricky, having installed a new Peronium injector with Spanner and Ashley Turner. The 3 engineers hoped that it didn't explode. Hopefully they had attached enough duct tape. Matilda fired up the engines, which moaned into life. The port ramp raised, and the Voyage Maker shakily rose as it continued to take blast fire. The ship tanked around as it gained altitude. Once it reached cruising altitude, its realm driver was activated and it disappeared to parts unknown. Once they were on the realm road, Sturnon took stock of everyone within the hangar of the Voyage Maker. She saw David Bruce and his wife Chloe mourning over the body of their son near the fore, and towards the aft and the engines, Abigail Lemasters, Maria Lemasters, Lieutenant Curtis Michael Bolt, Major Jonathan Stephen Smith, and Principal Instructor Andrew Ammo Wicks gathered around their teammate's body, all feeling tremendous grief inside. Captain Augustus Montgomery approached the High General Commissioner and spoke very gravely. "Ma'am, there is something I think you should see. Brace yourself, though." Sturnon followed and then saw it. Colonel Robert Ember's cold, dead body, with a single surgical shot to the heart, the energy burn of the shot still very visible. Caitlyn's hand clamped itself over her mouth to prevent herself from screaming and crying for the loss of her dear friend and colleague, a man who she would have happily sacrificed herself for. She calmed herself and excused herself, walking past the many wounded and the 3 dead bodies that were scattered within the cavernous cargo hangar of the Voyage Maker. Sturnon forced herself to march to the cockpit and ask Matilda, the pilot, if there was somewhere private she could go. She was directed to Matilda's dingy bedroom near the cockpit. She closed the metal door, sat on the used bed, and for the first time in her many years of service, cried a flood of silent tears. There was nothing she could do.